everybody, I'm Grandmaster Ben Finegold here with our weekly lecture series. This lecture is oddly named, and probably the name of the lecture is the opposite of what the lecture is about, so confusing the audience. Hey Gus, we just started. So, as I was saying, the name of the lecture is Working on Your Knight Moves, although the sponsor of the lecture, Sala Bukadum, and we want to thank our sponsor, and he's actually watching live. He's sort of new to chess, and like a lot of people who are new to chess, he has problems with the knights, and the problems that he has are his opponent's knights. So, tackling this lecture topic, I couldn't decide whether to show games where the knights are killing it and show how good the knights can be, or show games where the knights are getting crushed. And it seems like I could have done either one or both, but I decided, since the sponsor was interested in seeing the knights tamed, that I would show games where one side has two knights and the other side either has a bishop and a knight or two bishops, and the knights don't do very well, so he can see how to play against them, which is what he's interested in. Although the topic of the lecture, Working on Your Knight Moves, the sponsor wrote, and I quote, "Dealing with the opponent's knights, they always surprise me, and I have trouble anticipating their patterns of movement and attack." And this is a very common problem especially with newer players. And basically, the better you get at chess until you become a grandmaster and beyond is understanding that the top players like their bishops better typically, with few exceptions. And you have to understand the difference between bishops and knights. Also, occasionally, and by occasionally, I mean often, stronger players sacrifice the exchange. And they do this more often than lower rated players. Because if you sacrifice a knight or a bishop, then you don't have your knight or your bishop anymore. So that's sad. And if you don't have your pieces because you sacrificed them, and you don't have your pieces because you blundered them, then you don't have any pieces left. If you sacrifice the exchange, you're giving up a rook for a minor piece. You're not actually losing a piece. You're trading a piece that theoretically is worth more than the piece you're trading for. But that's only theoretical. I would argue the first 15 moves of the game, a bishop or a knight's worth more than a rook. The first 10, 15 moves of the game, your rook doesn't do very much. Sometimes your rook does nothing. And sometimes your rook doesn't move. It just sits in the corner. Conversely, bishops and knights, which are minor pieces, the first 10, 15 moves of the game, they're doing a lot of stuff. So the difference between a rook and a minor piece is in the end game. In the end game, a rook is much better than a minor piece. In the opening, that's not so clear. Probably the minor piece is better. In the middle game, it depends. Often in the middle game, the minor piece is better. So sacrificing the exchange is a typical way to proceed for a stronger player in a lot of positions. Now, the difference between a bishop and a knight is bishops are faster. And knights are not limited to the chessboard. A knight can go to all 64 squares, but they're slow. So if your bishop's on one side of the board, you can move your bishop to the other side of the board in one move. If you have a knight on one side of the board and you want to move your knight to the other side of the board, good luck. Also, knights are clumsy and bishops are not clumsy. Bishops move very gracefully down a diagonal. They can move many squares at the same time. They can move to different diagonals. Knights, if you want to move your knight even to a square that's right next to it, that takes some time. So it's funny, like if I highlight the white knight, if the knight wants to go to d5, that's easier to do than to go to b2. It takes less time. So knights are funny, and that's why Bob Seger has the song working on his knight moves. And a key lyric in that song is it's funny how the knight moves. Because it is funny how the knight moves. Knights move in a very strange way. Now, if you're a beginning player or a novice player, then knight moves can often confuse you because the knight goes in different directions. So if I put a knight on d5 and I wanted to move my knight again, I have 8 options, and those options aren't related. Knight f6 and knight b4 don't do the same thing, different parts of the board. So often, lower rated players miss knight forks because the knights move in a weird way, moves like an L, it changes color every move, and it can move to a square that attacks different squares than, say, if you moved a bishop. If your bishop's on a white square and your opponent's pieces are on dark squares, your bishop's not going to take those pieces. A knight doesn't care about that. A knight doesn't care what color your pieces are on. It especially likes if your pieces are on the same color, because then knights can fork. Okay, so in a wide open game where there's no pawns blocking each other, usually the bishop is better. If the position's blockaded and nobody can move very much and it's sort of closed, then the knights can jump over things. They're not blocked like the bishops. And I used to play the French defense a lot when I was younger. And I noticed in a lot of positions, either the Winoir or the advanced French, white's playing e5 at some point. If he plays e5 now, it's the advanced French. And you can see, especially from black's perspective, the knights are going to do more than the bishops. And since I was having black in the French defense, I noticed in a lot of my games, and this is 30, 40 years ago, that often I would make 7, 8, 9 knight moves in a row. Because where's my bishop going? Bishop going to d7, then what? Bishop's going to e7. But I could move my knights around. I could play knight e7 to f5, attacking d4, and c5 and knight c6 attacking d4, knight a5 to c4. If the bishop's on d3, sometimes I play knight b4, try to take the bishop. And so I was maneuvering my knights a lot in these closed positions, which I thought was odd, that I'm playing an opening and I'm just moving my knight every move, and I'm not moving my bishops very much. And certain openings, there's knight maneuvers that happen all the time. And before we look at the games I want to look at today, I want to show you a relatively famous one. It's in the Ruy Lopez. Of course, if you're a beginning player and your opponent's doing some knight maneuvers and you're like, I need a lecture on this. I need to sponsor a lecture because these knight maneuvers, I don't know what's going on. It's possible that these are very common knight maneuvers that have been happening for 100 years. And in the Ruy Lopez, which is a very common opening, some people call it the Spanish, in the main line for the last 100 years, okay, has been this position. And this position, basically every move is book. Black can play bishop b7, rook e8, h6, knight a5, knight b8, all theory. But what I wanted to say was, after knight a5, for example, which may be the oldest move, c5, d4, a very common thing for white to do is play knight d2, knight f1, knight g3. Occasionally, white plays knight e3, but usually we don't want to block the rook. And the knight on g3 can go to f5, and often white plays knight h2, so the queen can go to f3, and the knights can go to f5 and g4. And you might be like, what is this voodoo of moving the knights so much? And that's because there's been hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of Grandmaster games, and sometimes things work and sometimes they don't, and when things work, they're repeated. So if Karpov is playing in the 70s and 80s, and he's white and Ruy Lopez, and he's making these knight maneuvers, and he's winning, other people want to do that also. Okay, and black can do knight maneuvers in this position also, because it's sort of blocked, and it gets more blocked if white plays d5. Then you can see the knights maneuvering a lot. And this idea of knight d2, knight f1, knight g3 is very common. Now, something that I do that very few grandmasters do is with the black pieces, I'll play this closed Benoni. Grandmasters don't like this for black because white has more space. And the bishops aren't doing very much for either side. And usually I move my knight around like this. So I've had this position with black, and it reminds me when white plays knight d2, knight f1, knight g3 in the Ruy Lopez, which we just looked at, I'm doing the same thing. And what's funny is, in the Ruy Lopez, there's thousands of Grandmaster games, and in this variation, there's no games. Nobody does this with black except maybe me, and maybe Aronian, maybe. And it's just not common here because black is giving white a lot of space. White has this pawn in the center. And the bishops just don't do a lot the first 15, 20 moves of the game. The knights are the ones moving, and I like to get an attack with my knights on the king side. Okay. Now, the sponsor doesn't like when his opponents are moving the knights around and doing stuff that confuses him. So I decided today that I was going to show games where one side has more knights than their opponent, but they don't do well. The bishops are more important. And what's funny is, I think it's funny, this is my first time ever giving a lecture, a weekly lecture, that 2 of the games that I'm lecturing on were played today. So that means the sponsor's ideas are apt. I found games played today. I didn't have to go search 300 years of chess history and find a game that meets the requirements of the lecture. That they were played today. Now, the first game is an excellent game played by Vincent Keymer versus Arjun Erigaisi. This is at Tata Steel. Now, of course, if you're watching live, which some people are, this is played today. If you're watching on YouTube, which is 99.9% of you, then this was played last week or 2 weeks ago. Okay, so D3. Okay, D3 is slightly unusual. B5. In this position, D3 is not as common as rook E1. And D3 defends the pawn. So now this knight's attacking this pawn. This knight's defending this pawn. Well, this knight's not attacking this pawn anymore because I just played D3. However, white is threatening to remove the defender. Bishop takes knight, and then I take the pawn on E5. So black plays B5, D6. Slow going. Black plays bishop B7. White plays rook E1. And one of the reasons to play rook E1 is your knight's going to go to F1, as I indicated earlier in the lecture. The knight wants to go to G3. The other reason to play rook E1 is if black plays D5, the E pawn is not so well defended. Another reason to play rook E1 is if I want to play D4, then my E pawn's defended. So rook E1 makes a lot of sense. It vacates F1 for the knight, it defends the E pawn, and it pressures black's E pawn. Okay, knight A5. It's those pesky knight moves. And lower rated players tend to like knights more than bishops. Higher rated players tend to like bishops more than knights. So through your chess journey, of which the sponsor is just the beginning of his chess journey, he's only played chess for a year, he said, he should like knights more. And he should be demanding lectures on knights. However, when you're a grandmaster and you're rated 2770, which white is, you like bishops. So bishop C2. We can't give our bishop away for a knight. Okay, and C5. That was the reason black played knight A5. Get out of the way of his C pawn. Okay, and knight BD2. As I said, the knight is going to go to G3. Queen C7, knight F1. And he plays knight E3 instead of knight G3. I would have played knight G3. On the other hand, I'm not 2770, and I didn't win this game. So that's why I'm lecturing in a sponsored lecture, and the guy with white is playing for a first prize of like $100,000. That's the difference. Okay, so this is unusual because we're on move 11 or 12 or 13, and nobody's taken anything yet. There's been no trades. H6, knight H2. Okay, so you might ask, why did white play knight H2? especially if you're the sponsor. You're like, what's these knight moves? What's going on here? Well, actually, in the made-up game that I showed earlier, I said sometimes in the Ruy Lopez, white plays knight h2, queen f3, and puts the knights on g4 and f5. Another reason to play knight h2, which we're going to see later, is the same reason black played knight a5. It's to get out of the way of the pawn. So the knight on h2 is getting out of the way of the f pawn in case white wants to play f4 later. Okay, c4. Finally, maybe some pieces will get traded. Queen f3, as I indicated earlier, and they did trade. h5, stopping knight g4. Now, you have to be Arjun Erigaisi to play h5. If I was black, I wouldn't play h5, even though it controls the square that both white knights can go to, because it gives away the g5 square. So now, later in the game, white can put a knight or a bishop on g5. And typically, in the Ruy Lopez, when white does that, black plays h6. Well, h6 is illegal because black played h5. So h5 is a very risky move. And I don't play risky typically, and Arjun Erigaisi plays risky. Okay, but he's also 2770, so I can't, what for me? Okay, knight f5. And this is a funny game because I'm trying to show how you shouldn't be scared of the knights. But in this game, we have a little of everything. We have white having good knights and black having bad knights. And eventually, one of white's knights is just hopping all around the board and black's knights are helpless. So your knight wants to have squares it can go to where it can't be kicked out. And in this position, the black knight can go to c4. That's probably why black played c4 and took on d3. White's knight can go to f5, which is typical in the Ruy Lopez. Okay, g6, black's like, get out of here. And if you're a low-rated player or a high-rated player, you're like, this knight is good, except he's kicking me out. And this bishop is bad behind these pawns. Bishop's very passive. That bishop's not threatening white. But grandmasters like bishops. So we take that bishop and we get a permanent advantage. Now, one thing that's hard for low-rated players to understand is when you change what advantage you have. White had the advantage of a nice knight versus a bad bishop. Now, black got rid of that, and the consequence is white has the dark squares. And white's controlling the dark squares basically until the end of the game. This is a permanent advantage because white has a dark squared bishop and black doesn't have a dark squared bishop. So if you're afraid of knights, which the sponsor is, you should be afraid of bishops, because when your opponent has a bishop and you don't have that bishop, that's going to be annoying for the rest of the game, which you'll see. Okay, queen takes is forced because we're defending our knight. Bishop g5. Now, again, black's move is forced. King g7. And now rook d1, because the rook on a1 is no good. Rook on d1 is better. And in this position, white has two advantages. Black has a backward pawn on an open file, and white has the two bishops. When somebody has the two bishops, that means their opponent doesn't have the two bishops. which means one of your bishops has no counterpart. In this case, black doesn't have a dark squared bishop, so white's dark squared bishop is killing it. And the engine already says black's in a lot of trouble here. Even though black has knights, the knights don't have any squares to go to, which are awesome. Okay, queen e6. He's unpinning his knight, so his knight can move. Bishop b1. The bishop was blocking the rook. Now, if it was white's turn to move, white could win a pawn if they wanted to. They could take the knight, take the queen, and take on d6. And black might want to sacrifice that pawn because black's position's so bad. But black played rook d8 and decided to save the pawn. Queen g3. Queen g3 does two things. It lets my knight go to f3. Then maybe my knight can go to g5 later. And it lets me play f4. White wants to play f4, rook f1, and attack down the f file. Black's knights aren't very good. This one's on the side of the board. This one's pinned. Knight c4, attacking the b pawn. b3. Knight goes to b6. Now the knight can go to d7 and defend the other knight. Or if black's lucky, black can play d5. Open up the center and activate his knight and bishop. f4, opening up the center, the king's side for white's bishops. Takes, queen takes. Now we have the open f file. Now, if I had the white pieces and I was the sponsor, I would be worried about knight moves, because that's what the lecture's about, and the e5 square, which heretofore had a pawn on it, has nothing on it. So I would be thinking black wants to play knight d7, knight e5. On the other hand, there's no pawn on e5, which means d4 is not protected, which means white could play knight f3, knight d4. So unclear who's going to do what. He played rook d7, unpinning his knight. Knight was pinned, he unpinned it. Queen f2. In this position, if it was black to move, black would play knight h7 and get rid of this bishop. So white plays queen f2, which attacks the knight. So you guys are happy. And my bishop isn't blocked in by my queen anymore. So if you play knight h7, I can just move my bishop. I don't want to trade my dark squared bishop. I have the dark squares. My bishop controls the dark squares. Okay, more important is the knight's hanging on b6. Knight h7, attacking the bishop. Bishop f4. Knight c8. Oh, terrible knights. Knight f3. Knight wants to go to d4 or g5. King g8. Queen g3. Black basically can't do anything because black's knights are terrible. And when black played rook d7, I was espousing knight d7, knight e5. Now look what happened. Knight's on c8, terrible. Rook e7, knight d4, as I was alluding to earlier. And knight f5. The g-pawn's pinned. Knight f5. The rook has to move. Rook f1, winding up the rook and the black queen. h4. Queen takes pawn on c3. Bishop d2, where does the queen go? Knight h6 check, attacking the king and the f pawn. King h8, knight f7 check. You can see black's knights aren't doing very much. White played knight f3, knight h2, knight f3, knight d4, knight 8 f5, knight h6, knight f7. White's been improving his knight the whole game, only one knight. Black has two knights, but they're both terrible, especially the knight on c8. The game's almost over. Knight to d8, that's a tactical trick. So if you take the knight, I take the rook. And the knight is forking the rook and the bishop. And white's threatening rook f7 check. White takes the bishop. And if you look at 100 Grandmaster games, you're only going to see this once or twice. Two bishops versus two knights. And the reason you don't see it more often is Grandmasters don't want to have two knights against two bishops. Some lower-rated players do because they like their knights. But Grandmasters like their bishops. This position's wide open. Got a nice open diagonal with the king and queen that my bishop could go on. The G pawn is weak. H pawn is weak. Knight on c8 is terrible. Bishop e3, threatening bishop d4 check. Knight f6, attacking the queen. Queen takes a free pawn. And in this position, black's down a pawn, and white's threatening bishop d4. Bishop d4 is annoying. I know annoying. I've been married 3 times. Okay, my ex-wives would agree. Although they might agree for a different reason. Yeah, so this is completely lost. There's no defense to bishop d4, which wins everything. If your opponent has a dark squared bishop and you don't put all your pieces on the same dark square diagonal. So in that game, the bishops beat the knights, and white's knight was a hero. And so active knights are good, and even though the knight was killing it, it still took this bishop, because Grandmasters love taking bishops. So white had a knight on f5 that was amazing, took a bishop. Then white got another knight into black's territory and took a bishop, and then the bishops were too good. All the squares around the black king were too weak. And that game was played a few hours ago. Not Arjun's best game. Okay, the next game was also played today. Same thing happened. 2 bishops. The guy with the knights was moving his knights, and then they were no good. And he lost very quickly. And white is Matthias Bluebaum, the best player in Germany, versus Anish Giri, who's probably the best player in the Netherlands, although Jordan van Voorhees might disagree with me. Anish is better than Jordan, although not this tournament. In fact, Jordan won Vikanze a few years ago. I don't know, maybe he's not. Okay, so they played an opening where immediately black gave up the bishop and started moving their knights. This opening has a bad reputation for black. So black is ruining white's pawn structure, but white has 2 bishops. Grandmasters love bishops. So seeing Anish play this way is very unusual. Now, as I said earlier in the lecture, the bishops like open positions and the knights like closed positions. And that explains the next two moves. Black wants a closed position, so black plays e5. And that way the knights can maneuver around and the bishops are blocked. And black wants to put all of his pawns on dark squares because he has a white squared bishop. And white wants an open position because white has the bishops. So white takes en passant, even though that makes his pawn structure worse. Okay, now it's the battle of the bishops and the knights. Knight h5. The queen wants to go to h4. The knight's controlling f4. Knight c6. Then f4. Bishop d7, because white was going to play f5 and gain a tempo. h3. White's going to kick black's knight around. And in this position, I was watching live, and the commentators said black should sacrifice a piece here with queen h4. And then if you take the knight, you take with the g pawn, opening up the g file, and h3 is also hanging. And black has more than enough compensation for a piece. Okay, but Giri didn't want to lose his knight, and Giri played knight g7. Okay, and that's a very poor square for the knight. White played f5, so the knight can't get out. Now white has more space, and black's knight on g7 is terrible. Conversely, if white had his druthers, he could get his knight to d5. And black could put his knight on e5. So these knights have potential good squares. Knight on g7 is no good. Okay, queen h4. And now Bluebaum, who recently broke 2,700, and by recently, I mean today. That's pretty recent. It's his first time he's ever been 2,700. He plays very aggressively, and he played knight f4, because there's good knights and there's bad knights. Knight on f4 is obviously very good. h5. And now this is why I'm lecturing and Bluebaum is playing. Because in this position, I would fall apart. This position's too complicated. There's too many things that can be captured. It's too interesting. And I would think a long time, and I would make a move, and then I would think a long time on my next move. I would get in time trouble, and then I would blunder. So I wouldn't do well this game with either color. This is the problem Giri has. Giri's very good when the engine says he's better, and it's a strategical kind of game. When it's a wild and crazy mess, which this is, that's not Giri's strong suit. That's Bluebaum's strong suit. So this is a Bluebaum type of position, not a Giri type of position. Okay, Bluebaum played knight g2, sacrificing his h-pawn. And Giri says, okay, h-pawn's free. And then Bluebaum says, would you like another pawn? And plays rook f3. And black has to take on g4, because the queen's trapped. Now black's 2 pawns up. Then bishop e2, and black's queen is in trouble. Bishop e2 not only lines up the bishop and the queen, it attacks the d6 pawn. Black can't be greedy now and take on e4, because rook e3 wins the queen. Okay, so Giri took on f5. Now black is 3 pawns up. Rook e3, attacking the queen. Takes check. Now, if black plays knight e5, I can just take it because my bishop and your queen are lined up. The queen doesn't have any safe squares. It doesn't want to be on a dark square because white has a dark squared bishop and black doesn't have a dark squared bishop. Black has these knights which aren't helping. Knight e7. Queen takes d6. Now white's threatening f6. And the sponsor shouldn't be worried about these knights. They're pinned, terrible, king is exposed. The queen is lined up with the bishop. Bishop c6, threatening checkmate. Rook e4. Probably Anish missed that move. That attacks the queen by discovery. And if the queen moves away, black has to stop queen takes knight checkmate. Well, the queen can't go here because it's hanging. The queen can't go here because it's hanging. So, yeah. Black has to move the queen, but black can't move the queen because black's queen's attacked and white's threatening checkmate. The black queen can't move anywhere, which stops the checkmate. So Giri gave up his queen. Queen takes check. Bishop takes check. Bishop takes f5. Unfortunately, these knights still aren't very good. And white has the 2 bishops. And black's king is under tremendous attack here. And Giri resigned. Finegold his knight, never moved his knight again. In that game, the bishops, even the one that hadn't moved yet, were better than the knights. The knights were too passive. Okay, we got time for one more game. Okay, this was played in 2012. I wanted to look at an opening where it's common to have 2 bishops against 2 knights. Opening that I play sometimes, the Chigorin. White is Illia Nyzhnyk, who's an American grandmaster. Black is rated 2195. His last name is Bauer. This was played in 2012. And this opening was common in Chigorin's day, not very common now, although I've had black in this position. This is an opening where white gets 2 bishops and black gets 2 knights. Okay, and I've had this position before with black. Sometimes I castle king side, sometimes I castle queen side, and white can play bishop g2, bishop e2, bishop d3. They've all been played. Play bishop d3. I prefer to castle queen side usually in this opening. Rook b1. So the question is the isolated pawn and the doubled pawns bad? Or does white's big center make up for his ruined pawn structure? Also, there's the 2 knights versus 2 bishops. Okay, queen c2, threatening h7, king h8. Now if we take on h7, g6 blocks the bishop in. So he plays bishop e4, f4, and the black knights don't have very many squares to go to. White's pawns are preventing the knights from going anywhere good. White keeps pushing his pawns. And the knights can't go anywhere. And soon, black blunders a piece. So you've noticed since the opening started and black had his knights on c6 and e7, black hasn't moved his knights at all. And white's been going forward in the center, taking space. And in this position, black blundered a piece. The first knight move that he made. So black has a very bad position here because white's rooks are better on the open lines. White's bishop on e4 is a monster, and black's knights are very passive. Black tried to get aggressive with his knights, knight d5, but that's actually a blunder. He had to keep his knights where they were. And now white just takes everything, and there's a nasty pin. Takes. And now, because we have the rooks on the open file, we can play rook takes knight. And if you take the rook, then I take the rook on b8. So black resigned. Black has no more knights. Black's down a bishop. But what's funny is, after the opening, where black had the knights on e7 and c6, the knights never moved. They never had any good squares to go to. And then when he finally did move one, it lost a knight. Black wasn't a grandmaster. He was an amateur player. But yeah, it's a pretty bad mistake for somebody 2195. Shouldn't blunder a piece like that. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed that. Bishops versus knights. Knights not doing very well. Of course, I have games in the Chigorin where I'm black and I have the knights against the bishops. And sometimes I do okay. Working on your knight moves, looks like black has to work on his knight moves. So I want to thank our sponsor again, Sala Bukadum. If you'd like to sponsor a lecture, look in the description of the video, contact my wife Karen, and if you have a good idea for a lecture, we can sponsor your idea. I'm Grandmaster Ben Finegold. Thanks for watching. I'll see you guys next time. Bye.